Everybody, we want to welcome in Chris Pollone, correspondent for NBC News. Chris and I worked together many moons ago in Birmingham, Alabama, and Chris has had a storied career in local television and national broadcasts as well. And so, Chris, thank you so much for joining us today. And why don't you just kick us off with a little bit about yourself and what you're doing now?
Sure. Well, now I am for the past 8 years, I've been a freelance correspondent for essentially NBC News. I'll work for anybody who will call, but it was kind of a funny story. My wife always wanted to be a lawyer in New York City. I had no desire to live there. I had been in Birmingham for almost 12 years at the local station there, obviously, the NBC affiliate. And I moved, after we got married, I moved to New York in 2012, and it's a tough market to crack, as you might imagine. This my ring light here is driving me crazy. Glasses. This whole pandemic is bad for people with glasses. And so I got to New York, and I was having a real hard time finding, finding something to do. And the connections that I made through working at NBC in Birmingham really paid off for me, in the sense that for about 7 of the years that I was there, we were owned by NBC, 6 or 7. We were owned by NBC, and a few times I had done live shots for what's called NBC News Channel, the affiliate service. And so one day I was sitting, on my couch trying to figure out what I was going to do, and one of my producers from Charlotte called and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm not doing anything." And so they wanted to use me as a freelance correspondent in New York. And I did the Jerry Sandusky trial. I did about 2 weeks of Jerry Sandusky trial stuff. And I haven't done anything else since, for the most part. I freelance for them. I freelance some for the Weather Channel. I produce for NBC Nightly News and the Today Show field produce for other correspondents. But the bulk of my work now is doing stories and live shots for NBC affiliates around the country and NBC clients around the world. And I've been doing that for more than 8 years. And like you said, I've been to absolutely everything. And the funny thing is since I've been down here in Florida, I've been even busier than I was before. MSNBC has been hiring me the last few Saturdays to do stuff from here, because this is, becoming the pandemic hotspot. And so that's kind of what I've been doing now. And I guess the quick version of how I got here was, I went to Syracuse University. I really knew I wanted to work in television in some capacity, be it either scripted television, writing comedies, or being in news. Growing up, I just loved television. I loved television news. We were a family, probably doesn't exist anymore, that ate dinner watching the NBC Nightly News and our local newscasts in Boston. And so I figured if I went to Syracuse, a place with a solid communications program, I'd figure it out when I got there. I started doing sports and news, trying to keep my options open. Syracuse is kind of known as Sportscaster U. I was really interested in that, but then when I got there, I saw that there were people who were way more interested in sportscasting than I was, or at least better at it. And so I ended up kind of sending out news and sports tapes. During summers, I was very busy in internships, and I actually, through an internship at a little cable station, which ultimately became, the local Comcast. I met a guy who was a local radio legend in the Boston area, had been on the air for 40 years, Mass Broadcasting Hall of Fame. I was like working as a production assistant on one of his shows, running a camera or something. And he knew what I was doing, and he asked me if I wanted to start covering some city council meetings, as what they call a stringer for his radio station. And so, summer of '93, after my freshman year, I started going to local city council meetings and things like that, filing a bunch of raps and cuts for the morning. And I did that for every summer, 94, 93, 94, 95. And when I was getting ready to graduate and had no job, I was sending out sports and news tapes. And Bruce, my mentor, called and said, "Hey, look, we've got a morning anchor job available. I know you want to be in television, but if you want to come take this job, you can certainly do it until you find something." So I went home. I did that. I was making $7 an hour and working 4 a.m. to noon. Every day at noon, I would go home and make resume tapes and send them out. Got my first television job in Jackson, Mississippi. went there as a producer slash reporter, did that for 2 years. And Gene, you probably know, if you find yourself a good morning producer, you don't ever want to let them go because nobody wants to work overnight. And so that's kind of what happened to me. I was doing a pretty good job producing overnight. So I ended up staying on that for about 2.5 years, even though it was funny when I certainly I have zero ego, but to say, like, when I got there, I quickly became one of their better reporters. And I knew that because when we had sweeps periods, ratings periods, my news director would take me off of producing my show and make me work Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. so I could report for the early evening shows or whatever. And then when ratings were over, he'd switch me back to producing. So needless to say, they knew that I wanted to report. And after about 2.5 years, I moved over to full-time reporting. Stayed there for a total of 4 years when a very good friend of mine who worked at another affiliate in Jackson had been working in Birmingham at WVTM for a while, and she gave my tape at the time, no link, but gave my tape to Willie Chrisman, who was the news director at WVTM. I went for an interview. I never heard anything. And after several months, I finally got a call and said, hey, we'd like you to come over here and report. And then so that started about an 11, 12-year career there. And about halfway through, Tim Gardner, the news director at the time, we started going through some cuts in the industry. And Tim asked me if I'd be interested in helping with sports. And so for about the last 5 or 6 years I was there, I was kind of doing a hybrid role where I was doing news a few days a week, and during football and basketball season, I was doing sports. So it was really fun. And then I moved to New York and kind of made the leap from there. So that's what I'm doing on a daily basis. I wake up and wait to see if I get the call for something to do that day. Sometimes things are pre-planned. I've been talking with the Southeast Bureau here at NBC, and it's likely that I will be covering something for them here for MSNBC here in Florida on Saturday. But most days I wake up, I have no idea whether I'm going to work that day or not. I might get a call around 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning saying, like Monday morning, it was the Washington Redskins are going to change their name. Can you put together a story for us? Sometimes it's something bad happened. Can you get on a plane and go there? And, that's curtailed a little bit since the pandemic started, but that's essentially my life now. Is some weeks are really busy and other weeks are very slow. And when things are slow, you do your projects at home that you have to do, and when things are busy, you go and work. And that's what I've been doing. So that's 24 years in a nutshell.
That's great. Thanks so much. So there's one thing there that you just said that I'd like to pull a thread on, if you don't mind, and because I'm curious about it, I'm sure they are too. The students are. When you get the call, and we can use Monday as an example, if you don't mind,
Sure.
Walk us through, like, you get the call and they say, this is the story. How do you do that on Monday? What happened on Monday?
Yeah, it's so different. Working in local news, we would go have a meeting, and then we would assign stories, and then you'd start to make phone calls and whatever. Working for who I work for now, it's a far different network is a far different experience where a great deal of the process, the reporter is not there or not involved, which can be good and bad. You tend to miss doing certain things that you like doing when you worked in a different entity. But they called Monday morning. They put me in contact with one of my producers. That producer is responsible for marshaling all of the elements that are going to go into our story for that day. And so I will kind of, at that point, I will start reading all kinds of news sources to kind of get up to speed on what the story is for the day. I will put on MSNBC because quite often, there might be guests who talk about what we're talking about on that day that we can use in our story. I will peruse the website and the rundowns of the local affiliate in the market where the story is happening. And over the course of, say, 10 a.m. to noon or so, it could be later, depends on the story, my producer will just start putting elements into a file for me. Okay, this correspondent and crew did an interview with the team owner a couple days ago. This crew out in the Midwest interviewed a tribal leader. Here's the log of the interview. And then I start reading all that stuff and I pull over the sound bites that I like, and then I write the story. And so what ends up happening, and I'm sorry, it's very humid here in Florida.
Yeah, sure.
So I'll have to blot a couple times, but
No worries.
I mean, you guys know, you guys are all so. You know, and I'll write an anchor intro, I'll write the package, and I'll write a tag. And then if it gets approved, I literally grab my iPhone. So, you know, if you think that, you know, it's tough being an intern and you don't kind of get all the great equipment or whatever, I should have brought it in here with me, but I have a little microphone that attaches here. It's about 60, 70 bucks. And I go sit under a comforter wherever I am, and I just record my track into this and I email it off to Charlotte where it is edited. And now, you know, it's really funny because in the past, I had been offering to shoot my own stand-ups on my phone, do whatever it needs to do to get, you know, me on camera to make it look more, you know, reporter involved. And, you know, unless I had a network crew available to me, I generally will do my stories without stand-ups. And especially on Saturdays, I'm kind of the Saturday guy. I kind of cover whatever's going on in the nation every Saturday. But since the pandemic started, you know, they shipped us all ring lights and this thing called a Padcaster, an iPad, where I literally, from my friend's living room here, I did 2 days worth of live shots on Capitol Hill coverage, but from the living room here, just using an iPad with a Live View app on it. And so I've been shooting a lot more of my own stand-ups, and so those have been going into the story. I've been doing a lot of coronavirus features, things about, you know, society and medical stories. And I've got one producer who's just like, go crazy, you know, do whatever you want to do for stand-up. So I've been getting as creative as I can. I did a stand-up out by the pool the other day talking about working from home, and so that's about it. So my deadline on a given weekday is about 2:30, generally in the afternoon, because it has to be on the feed by about 4 o'clock Eastern time. That's when a lot of NBC affiliates go on the air with their earliest news. On Saturdays, my deadline's about 4:30 to get it on for about 6. And then that's that. And then there's, the other component is breaking news coverage, where I will go to an event where something is going on and be on scene. That tends to be like news channels, like grueling. We're always the first in and last out. So God forbid if something major happened near here, I'd probably write the story tonight for tomorrow morning. And then I would be out on scene about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I would do custom tags for stations. And then I do live shots from about 4 a.m. until 10 a.m. and then do it all over again for midday and early evening, ending with my last shot being about 9:30 on the West Coast, 9:30 Eastern time for, 6:30 on the West Coast. So when we do that, it's a 17, 18-hour day, and it's, you have to hate to sleep, but it's exhilarating. And, I've been to, unfortunately, a lot of bad stuff. My wife always jokes that if you see me at the airport, just turn around and go the other way, because it's probably not a good thing that I'm there. But I've covered unbelievable things over the last 8 years that I never would have imagined that I would be involved in.
Well, COVID has certainly proved it necessary, but could you talk a little bit about maybe 1 or 2 or 3 of the things you learned as a young producer and reporter at the station level, which now you pretty much have to put in play, even at the national level?
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one thing always is going to come down to writing. Am I wrong, G?
No, that's
you
correct.
Deal with it every day. Honestly, in any industry you work in, I hear this from my wife at her. She's an attorney who works for an accounting firm. My colleagues who work in tech. The number one complaint is that people get out of college and they can't write well. And if you can write well, especially in this industry, I think you'll always have a job of some sort. And so my biggest lesson was going from the theoretical at, the news lab at Syracuse University. I laugh now when I think about it, because when we had assigned packages, now granted, I'm a dinosaur. This is way different than anything that you all do. We had to go to a cage and check out a real video camera and a tripod and some lights and some microphones. And so I think we were allowed to do that at noon on whatever day we were assigned. We'd go get the stuff, and the package would be due at 10 a.m. the next morning. And I can't tell you the number of times that semester that I missed my 8:30 a.m. class to get that package done by 10 a.m. the next morning. What was I doing? I have no idea. It was a minute and a half of television. You quickly learn how to work quickly, to write well, tightly, and concisely. And so that's kind of what I learned, because when I did my first job and I was producing the overnights, I was by myself. And so at the time, CBS was going through some issues with their morning show. And so they started giving more and more time back to the local affiliates. They called it the blended format, and stations could take all this extra time. And so I would get in about 10:30 at night. I would have to stack the show, write the show, and then I'd have to make sure I was in the edit bay by, an hour before the show to start editing my tapes. And there was more than one occasion when the show was rolling and I'm trying to produce it on the telephone while editing manually. Okay, this isn't non-linear. I couldn't just do it at a computer. This is like set an in point, set the edit point, or whatever. And then later on, towards the tail end of my producing stint, I ended up actually anchoring the show with the meteorologist because we lost our morning anchor. And so by that point, I had gotten an associate producer and an editor who helped out. But I would go to the set 10 minutes before the show. I'd still be finishing scripts, and when the show began, at every break, the director would say, "You're 2 minutes heavy, you're a minute light," or whatever. And I'd have to turn to the meteorologist and go, "You have to go 30 seconds shorter." And I'd be sitting there, on a piece of paper trying to figure out what stories I needed to cut and how I needed to keep the weather guy in check so he didn't put us, over. And so I think that, the most important thing to learn is to write tightly, concisely, get your point across, write in active voice, and do it quickly, and identify what the most important thing. I mean, this is all storytelling, no matter what, it's TV, radio, telling stories to your grandkids, whatever, it's storytelling. So what is important about that story? Anytime you go out to do a story, figure out what's important. What is your one key theme of the story that you're trying to tell, and make sure you deliver that. And then all the rest builds towards delivering that part, that one aspect of that story. And so I think that if you can write quickly, write well, identify what the main issues are, and get them out there quickly, I think you'll be okay. Because in today's world, when I started, I'm sure we did 5 and 6. We certainly didn't have a 4 or a 4:30, and we had a 10. Now, people are live every 20 minutes. And so, it's one of the biggest frustrations of the job is that, you feel like you spend so much time presenting your story that you don't have enough time to report the story. And so, it's more important now than ever than to be able to be a quick researcher, a quick writer, and get things done so that when you are constantly on the air, you're able to deliver good information to people. So I would say that's the number one thing that I would constantly work on. The voice, the tracking, the stand-ups, you can get all that. That will come. But unless you are, if Gene gets a link, any news director in the country or whatever gets a link, they're going to watch. And beyond seeing how you look and listening to how you sound, they're going to know within the first 30 or 40 seconds, this person doesn't write great, this one does, whatever. And then, so I think that that's the thing that will kind of be with you the whole time. And then, to make Gene's life easier, I'll tell you the other big one is news directors, bosses love people who can generate their own stories. It's the number one problem in news, story generation. They call it feed the beast. There's a big beast. It might be an hour and a half. It might be 2 hours long. You've got to fill it. The best reporters, the best producers, the best people who work in a television station or a newspaper are the people who come in and say, I want to do this story, this story, this story, this story. And then you have to have management go, no, we don't like that. We like that. You know, whatever. But the person who comes in every day and goes, I don't have anything, is a drag, is a drain, because then people have to, you know, waste time trying to find something for you to do. So I would say emphasize your writing, emphasize your ability to write quickly, concisely, identify the story, not make them complicated, and then really work on your story generation. And anytime you come across an idea that might be a story, keep track of it. Keep track of it. Pitch it again. And news managers really like people who can pitch lead stories. You know, anybody can find a feature, and features are great and they're memorable. But we have to find hard news, and we have to turn it out. And so the people who can identify lead stories really succeed in this business.
That's great. So we've talked a little bit about craft, but there are a couple of themes there about career management, but also about story generation, particularly the latter, which you just hit on, which is, you know, I think that maybe some of us, and especially when you're young, you think of a story as this thing out there or a list of ideas that you need to go after. But, you know, what I try to let folks know when they first come into the newsroom here is that it's really about people. So your network ability, your connections, and, you know, in the old days, we'd call it working a beat, you know?
Right.
So talk a little bit about developing contacts, because a story, developing a contact or a source, you may put 90 days into that before a good idea comes out of that. You know, talk a little bit about how you've been successful at that.
Sure. You know, I think the best journalists are people, you know, people who like people and love to shoot the breeze. They're the people who, you know, notices that they have the same cashier at the supermarket every week, or the same bartender, or you know what I'm saying? They're people who kind of notice these patterns and then build relationships. And, you know, one of the things that was hard for me, you know, I transplanted from the Northeast to the deep South. I was working overnight, and it was very easy for me to go in, do my show, go home, have breakfast, and go to bed, and not interact. And I really had to push myself, especially when I was doing that shift, to get to know my community better. And so when you are working somewhere, oftentimes it can be stuff that you're legitimately interested in. I mean, many of you maybe go to church, belong to hobby groups, go to gyms. The things that you do in your everyday life are what your viewers do, and that's how they build their relationships. And so, you know, when I was in Mississippi and when I was in Birmingham, I was kind of fortunate, because at the time we didn't have a lot of product like a lot of stations do now. And I even had some news directors who let us have source stays where we could just pay a visit to the city council offices or the local police department or whatever, and just go shoot the breeze. Today, you're probably not going to run into a lot of that. If you're not putting product on the air every day, you're not very valuable. So that's the thing that you have to do in your everyday life, and talk to people, listen to what they're talking about. You know, a lot of people turn out stories now using things like Facebook groups and Nextdoor, just kind of seeing what people in their neighborhoods are complaining about or what's on their minds. But it's just a matter of, if you like crime coverage, when you're on a scene, you chat up every person you see out there and get to know them, get phone numbers. It's so, like, in some regards, you know, I'm not going to say it's easy. I don't want to denigrate your experience, but, you know, now with cell phones, people don't mind being texted. You know, back in the day, I used to have to get telephone numbers and promise these people, I'm not going to call you late at night. You know, I'm not going to call you in the middle of the night unless something happens. But now you can text and email just to check in. Hey, what's going on? How's your kid? Da, da, da. You know, what's going on? Oh, the jail's falling down. That's good to know. Maybe we could do a story about that. You know, any aspect of coverage that you're interested in, the more active you are in your community, the more stories you're going to generate. If you have, you know, one of the things that was always hard for me was, for the vast majority of my local news career, I was almost always single. I was almost always working 2 p.m. to 11 p.m., didn't have children. So, like, a lot of the things that society, you know, generally goes through, kids in school, Boy Scout meetings, Girl Scout meetings, Little League, short of going to church on the weekends, I really didn't have a similar experience. And you got to be real careful about that because, you want to be representative of your viewers. And so I had to be very, very cognizant of what are my limitations in my experience. And I might not care what day school goes back on, but many people do. And I had to check myself every day to make sure that I was plugged into what was going on. And that's why having a really diverse newsroom, having a diverse station helps out, because you can sit in a meeting and go, oh, who cares when school opens? And the 10 parents in the room would be like, I do. You're like, okay, yeah, maybe that is important. So I just kind of found that the more I interacted, the more I was friendly to people at the grocery store and the post office and whatever, the more prone to people telling you things that could develop into stories would be. And, one of the mistakes that some people would make if they had these source days is like they try to take the sheriff to lunch or, the mayor of this town or whatever. And any reporter will tell you 85% of the time, your real story leads are coming from the secretary, from the guy cleaning picking trash up off the county, doing the yard at the county buildings or whatever, because those are the people who kind of notice things, not the figurehead who's sitting in an office all day. So you've got to be judicious and kind of cast a really wide net. But story ideas can come from anywhere. And the more people that you're friendly with and the better you are at kind of networking, for lack of a better word, you're going to generate a lot more stories. And like Gene said, you might have a relationship that never, ever generates a story. It's just your friend or your person you go to the gym with or whatever. But then one day that person might blurt out something that you're like, wow, really? Your property taxes went up 10%. I had no idea, that will be a legit thread that you can pull and start to develop into a story down the road.
That's great. And that leads into the next point I'd like to follow up on, which is the long burn. You mentioned it, keep repitching ideas. So are there any things in particular you do to just kind of like make a note of an idea or a story and just keep it filed away so that you can think, oh, there's something topical now, I can hook that too?
Yeah, it used to be a notebook, where I just, put the date every day, kind of have my story ideas listed out, and ones that didn't go, I just move them over to the bottom of the next day and kind of do that. Now with digital tools, things like Evernote or, even I think the notes program in an iPhone nowadays is essentially the same as Evernote. You can be I've always been really, interested in technology and kind of very interested on the intersection between technology and journalism. And so back when we had dumb flip phones or whatever, I went out and got myself a Palm Trio, which was, at the time was a real cutting edge smartphone. And I started saving all my business card contacts, transferring them into the phone. And then in the notes file, I would put, like, if we went to go do a story, we used to go to all these far-flung Alabama counties, and, maybe there was, a kid fell in a well in, little podunk town or whatever, and we'd go out there and we'd talk to the sheriff, we'd talk to the mayor, we'd talk to the mom. Everybody I met, I would say, hey, let me get your number, just in case something happens down the road or you need to get a hold of me or whatever, let's kind of get numbers. And I would take down their number and their name, and then I would put them in my phone, and I would save a note of like child in well, child fell in well, in this town or whatever. And what ended up starting to happen is somebody pop up off the news desk, 2 years later and go, hey, there's a big fire in little town we haven't been to in 2 years or whatever. And I'd be like, huh. And I'd search my phone, and sure enough, I'd be like, oh, I've been there. I'd just start calling those people and be like, you see a fire, or whatever. And then we could get phoners from those people who lived in the town and whatever. So I think now with your digital tools like Evernote and or just your phone, the more data you keep on every story you do, then the better off you're going to be when you go to revisit something down the road. NBC, and I don't know what local stations are doing now. Back in the day in iNews or whatever newsroom program we were using, we had a hot file, And a lot of times if we did something that was kind of a recurring story, the reporter would have to go in at the end of the night, kind of type up the update. Now NBC created their own system called News Connect, which is like super helpful. So like on the Redskins story Monday, the first thing I did was log into News Connect, and I looked at the thread of Washington Redskins name change stories, and kind of seen what our reporters have churned out before and other articles that have been put in there. So I find personally, as a reporter or a producer, keeping your own sort of hot file or News Connect is really helpful. And you know, there are a million different tools. I mean, some people still use a notebook. Hey, that's fine. If you've got a great memory and you can go back, great. I just find that having searchable stuff is really helpful. When I took it over to sports when I started doing sports, because at the time I was working with Don Hawes. I think you guys overlapped, right, Gene?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So Don would go to an Alabama game and he would write, you know, a log of the game. You write down every play. Okay, it is 1:32 and 7 seconds. Tua Tagovailoa took the snap and rolled out or whatever. Well, I took my computer and I did it on my computer. When I finished my log in a Word file or whatever, I would save it. And so then when I was doing sports a year later and some defensive back I couldn't remember or never remembered hearing about got hurt, I just went to my logs from last year's games, typed in his name, and saw which games we had highlights of him from. And so it can be used, news, sports, whatever. Just keeping a good searchable file and keeping those story ideas in there, and then, you know, make it as rich as you want to. So the other thing that news managers get mad at is they'll say, you know, you kick out 5 stories. All right, I want to do this, 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 but you haven't really reported on any of them. Nobody's expected to go out and go report the whole story, and then the TV station says, you know, we're really not interested in that. You just wasted all your time. But if you make an initial call and see if it's true, or, you know, or just kind of get some background, or see if the people might be interested in talking about it. You know, like somebody tipped me off the other day that people who are trying to adopt children from China are having a real hard time right now because of the pandemic. If I went into a morning meeting and just said that, they'd be like, oh, okay, that's kind of interesting. But if I talked to a guy who is having trouble and said, you having trouble? Yes, I am. Would you maybe talk to us if we wanted to? Yeah, I'd love to. You know, just let me know. Then at least I can go in the morning meeting and go, hey, remember that Chinese adoption story I've been pitching for a few weeks? Like, this guy said he'd talk to us, you know, and they may go for it. So I just find being organized, whether it's a notebook or something digital, is very helpful. Keep that stuff going along. I've had friends who say that they pitch things 3 times and then, you know, if the station doesn't go for it, they strike it, you know, because they're never going to go for it. But, you know, you never know when something comes back around and you need this story.
That's great. So let's talk a little bit about that long burn when it comes to career development and
Sure.
networking with people. You provided an example there about someone that you met and then got to know and then became a
Right.
mentor and then actually gave you your first job. You know,
Right.
and that I'm sure that didn't happen in 2 weeks. I mean, that took time.
No.
So
Right.
this idea of networking with people you meet even once at a job fair on campus or something like that, and then if they appear open and willing to dialogue, take advantage of that. But you actually have to be active in developing that relationship. If you wouldn't mind speaking about that.
I've never gotten a job in my television career from applying for one. Okay. My first, okay. So yeah, going back to the radio station, that was from meeting the talent while I was an intern. Okay, so that led to 3 summers of being a stringer. My first summer, I was total volunteer, you know, and I think Bruce, my mentor, slipped me a stipend, but I think it was out of his own pocket. And that led to my first paying job, right? When I was working at that radio station in Boston, one morning I got a call from the news director at the CBS in Jackson, Mississippi, and he said, I'm looking for producers. Do you want to come down here and be a producer? And I said, no. And you know, stupid 21-year-old kid, right? And he said, no. And I said, yeah, how'd you get my information? I really want to be a reporter. And he said, oh, you met our consultant when you were a senior at Syracuse, you met with this guy, Tom Dolan, and he met with a group that your professor picked that thought would be, you know, a good producer, and you sat and met with him, and he was impressed with you. I remember meeting with Tom Dolan. It had been a long time before. I never knew he was going to tell some news director in Jackson, Mississippi that I might be a producer candidate. So, of course, I said no, because I knew I wanted to report too. And the next day I get a call from his boss who says, you talked to my news director yesterday? I said, yeah. He said you weren't interested? And I said, well, no, I know I want to report. I'm willing to produce, but I know I want to report too. And he said, oh, well, you know, if we worked out some sort of thing where you could report and produce, would you be interested? I said, absolutely. And that was my first job. I went over to Birmingham because of one of my good friends who worked at a competing station in Jackson. She had been working at my station. She brought my link, gave it to Tom Allen and Willie Chrisman, and I got hired there. And then shortly after I got to Birmingham, there was a major tornado in Tuscaloosa. This was back in 2000. And I had been there about a month, 6 weeks. And Sterling, one of the assignment managers, was like, all right, we're going to send you down to Tuscaloosa. You're going to do live shots for NBC affiliates around the country. And I looked at her, I said, you sure? Because I was coming from Jackson, Mississippi, where I barely did live shots at all. And she goes, yeah, you can do it. And so that was the first time I was 26. I had been in the business for all of 4 years. And I did live shots from New York to Los Angeles and I think MSNBC. And so then any time that things happened in the South, because we were in NBC O&O, we'd be the first ones in, and I, most of the time, would be the one to go. And news channels started flying their producers in, and I got to know them and the other correspondents. And so when I got to New York, two of the producers actually who I had been friendly with for years were the ones to reach out and kind of say, hey, we might need some help in New York City. Can you do it? So, the last thing I had applied for in New York before I did the Sandusky trial was the Apple Store. I had one interview and I wasn't asked back. And I was really depressed. I said, all right, I can't even get a job at the Apple Store. And, one of the great things about Syracuse is it's such a great network. I mean, we have alums everywhere. And so I get to New York all excited, like, all right, I'm finally going to leverage this Syracuse thing, because in the South, there weren't a ton of Syracuse grads. And I called some people. I said, hey, I went to Syracuse. And they go, yeah, we all did here in New York. So they're like, great, good luck. So it was really depressing when I first got there. But then, if I hadn't done all these things and done Hurricane Katrina and all these, grueling things for NBC and kind of had a good attitude and done a good job, they never would have asked me to do it. But yeah, I have never, I had an agent for 10 years and I had a couple interviews, but nothing really great. And every job that I've had has been through meeting and kind of becoming friendly with people who could help you. And it's such a small business. You really get to know everyone. You bump into people and then they switch stations or whatever. There's been widespread stories of guys who hired someone later, ending up the other guy that he hired ended up being his boss at another station or whatever. So, it's always been my philosophy to try not to burn any bridges, treat everybody, with respect and a positive attitude, because you just don't know. I tell every group I talk to that one of you may hire me someday. And I hope that happens. And so I hope you remember that, I talked to your internship group and I was good, and you enjoyed it or whatever. It's just one of those crazy things that I think you'll find almost more than any small insular industry, that this really is, it's a small group. And so the more people you're friendly with and that you impress with your work, the more people will remember you when it's time for a job.
Thanks. That concept of you've had a little bit more firsthand knowledge of it. What I'm leading to right now, which is the idea of you have this expertise, you have this set of skills, and being a freelancer, you have to also be an entrepreneur. So this idea of hustling for work, it is sometimes alien to journalists and sometimes alien to young people who have this concept of go to school, get a job, work for someone else, and then keep getting hired, for the rest of my career. But
Yeah,
there are points in everybody's, a lot of people's professional lives where you're kind of having to figure out how to do something on your own and be a business person as well. And
yeah,
the gig economy is bigger than it's ever been. So to the extent that you can share some insight on that, particular to journalism, but also just in
sure.
general, as if you observe how things are moving, would be valuable.
Yeah, it was a whole new world. 11 years in Birmingham, weekly paycheck, contract, every 2 to 3 years, sign a new contract, right? Benefits, never really had to, I mean, other than cuts, never really had to think about it. And then somebody says, hey, we want to hire you today. What's tomorrow? What's going to happen tomorrow? And so I will say this, I am still not great at it. It was a whole new world for me. I didn't know, what do you charge? What, how do you do any of this? And so I just started, literally one of the producers who got me involved said, tell them you want this amount of money per day. She, for all I know, she could have screwed me, or she could have done, like I had to kind of, because people are kind of guarded or whatever. Some people will share, some people won't, but over the years I've had to kind of like gauge whether I'm still, my rates are still relevant and things like that. I had people that I became good friends with who, told me, oh, you can charge $10 a day for your phone. Had no idea, they probably should have told me that when they onboarded me. That is, it's a challenge. And it's one of those things where, I was just reading the other day, Poynter was saying that younger and younger journalists are going to be doing more and more freelancing. I mean, it's clear that the powers that be, the big ownership groups, are trying to reduce headcounts or whatever. So you may start to, it used to be a thing where, if you worked in a market, say below 20, you had a contract. If you worked 20 and above, like the top 10, top 20 markets, a lot of those people are freelancers all the time, day hires. Now they're saying that younger and younger journalists are going to be doing more and more freelancing. And with the skills that you all have in terms of digital and online, you might get picked up just to write one article for one website or whatever. So there are a lot of resources out there. There's a freelancers union that provides a lot of guidance. I find that just in my day-to-day work of working with freelance photographers, audio people, producers, things of that nature, you kind of shoot the breeze and kind of get a sense. But it's tough. There's no real manual, or if there's stuff that is real valuable information, you kind of have to pay an arm and a leg, to get it. And then it may or may not be valid. It might just be some guy who made a plan. But yeah, it's one of those things where I started doing this. And then in a Syracuse alumni thing, I got this thing that said that this like production company was looking for freelance talent from Syracuse grads and producers. And so I contacted them and I went and sat down with the guy, and he was looking for field producing help on, basically they shoot video news releases, celebrity news, things like that. And so I did that for about a year. I did a few things, but the guy was terrible. He runs off everybody who ever comes works for him. But at least I got to meet some people. I got to meet some freelance video crews. And then because NBC had owned part of the Weather Channel, I used to do, I still do a bunch of live shots for the Weather Channel when I'm out on weather-related stories. And one day I just happened to be talking to the desk there, and I said, hey, look, if there's a weather story, since we have a relationship with NBC, Weather Channel has a relationship with NBC, if I'm not working and you want to hire me, I'll go work for you for that day. It's in the family. I wouldn't go work for CNN or CBS while I'm actively really doing a lot of NBC. I don't think they would appreciate me popping up, on somebody else, unless they really, really wanted to pay me a lot and, more often than NBC. But then that led to me getting a contact. One of my producers who got me into NBC said, hey, I know this guy. He does tech explainer videos. So Panasonic will hire this guy to make a 1.5-minute video to teach you how to use your new television. And he needs somebody to like supervise scripts or something. And so I started talking to that guy. He started kicking me a lot of work of like reviewing his tech scripts and stuff like that. So that's kind of how it went. Even to this day, I had a friend in Boston who needed something shot in Brooklyn. She was like, do you know any freelance crews? Yes, I do. Called a buddy of mine who does a lot of my live shots and his audio guy. I said, hey, my friend needs this thing over at the electric company over in Brooklyn. So I went and field produced a shoot for her over there. So it's more networking than anything. I know there are boards that list freelance gigs and things like that, but it's a bigger reality in the world, and I think you guys are going to run into it a lot earlier than I did possibly. So prepare yourself for that. It's a tough life, you know. It's one of those things where I tell people when I'm crazy busy, it's amazing, but I don't know that most years I would be able to afford a 1-bedroom apartment in Midtown Manhattan without the, you know, great generosity of my lawyer wife, you know. So, you know, but there are people who do. It's just, you know, they have the right mix of jobs and work often enough. But it's perilous. In 2016, I was essentially beyond the full-time correspondent, Jay Gray, who goes and kind of does everything. I was kind of like Jay Gray Jr., and he was 2016 Olympic year, I think it was. So I think he was gone for the Olympics for a while. And so, like, I literally went from Baton Rouge police shooting to Orlando Pulse to Dallas police shooting, like almost back to back to back. I was gone for weeks, and it was one of the most lucrative years that I had. And then, like, you know, a couple of years ago, they cut back a lot. NBC cut back a lot, and it was kind of tight. And that's when you kind of start to, all right, maybe Weather Channel can help me out a little bit here. Maybe I can look for some production gigs, you know, like corporate production gigs and stuff like that. So it's more stressful than having a contract and just showing up to work every day. But it's a reality that I think most of us are going to face at some point in our careers.
Great. We haven't talked about other media, digital media, social media. So let's talk a little bit about that. Are you responsible for filing any of the web stories that are associated with the TV work that you produce? Okay, they have a different team for that.
Yeah, it's yeah. As a matter of fact, no, they handle all of that. Once my story gets edited, especially a lot of these coronavirus features I've been doing, like my producer the next day will send me a link from, you know, a small NBC website in, you know, Iowa. And what they do is, I guess they have a feed for the affiliates where they put supers on the package and, you know, kind of make it in a nice digital format with the script and all that. And they send that out to stations. I have nothing to do with that. So okay. Yeah, it's, that's the hard part, you know, mid-career, that I certainly have probably a lot fewer skills than people who are just coming out right now, because I haven't had to deal with that in a while.
Yeah. You mentioned the idea of working social media to get ideas and to connect with people who have stories that maybe they want to be told. Sure. So that's a component of it. What else? I mean, obviously, to us at the local level, 80% of our traffic to our website comes from Facebook referral. So. Wow. You know, we would publish stuff on the website, and then the next step is always push it out on social media.
Right.
And then it generates that traffic. Do you use social media for your own personal use or professional? What's the mix there for you?
Yeah, both. It's you know, it's that double-edged sword. You know, I mean, you know, your bosses are trying to figure out what to do about Facebook, you know, and places are trying to get paid through things like Apple News and whatever, because ultimately in the early to mid 2000s, we traded dollars for dimes, you know, for going from viewers to clicks. I've been part of initiatives, I think under you and, you know, whatever, when we just went web first and tried to figure out how to monetize it later and stuff. I just try to maintain, you know, it's more of a, you hear people talk about personal brands. And I think that you're seeing that more and more, even among network talent who have longstanding relationships with their particular networks or their local TV stations. you know, you see some TV stations where everybody has to be, you know, Bill Smith, WXYZ, but then like you notice at the network level or at some local stations, it's just Bill Smith TV. And so certain places allow people to kind of own their own social media personas. My personal philosophy is I try to be real. So I tweet about sports a lot. It's my outlet. I tweet about funny stuff that I run into in my daily life. And then when I'm covering news, I tweet the news. But I try not to tweet stuff that, like I had a person that I mentor who's a sports reporter, and she was tweeting out basically play-by-play of, you know, an Auburn or an Alabama game. And I said, hey, we can see it, you know, like it's on TV. Or I say, I need you on your social media to tell me the stuff I can't see sitting at home. And so that's kind of what I try to do. I try to keep a balance of personal and news, and kind of like, I want people to look at me as like, hey, it's Chris, that fun guy who kind of does some stuff or whatever. And they know that they can trust me when it comes to news, but then they can also get, I had a tweet that kind of went crazy the other night because I cut a watermelon, but I took the whole skin off and then I cut the watermelon. I thought, how else do you cut a watermelon? And my wife called me a psychopath. So I put it online, and it just like, it blew up more than anything I ever done. People call me like you should be locked up, dude. No, that's the only way to do that. I think things like that make you authentic and real. I personally, I don't know about you, but like I personally hate the accounts that just kick out, here's my story today, here's my story today. It's like, right. Okay, I know I could watch it on TV or I can go to your website. I just try to be authentic. And I think people like that. And so I know that like I have personalities that I like particularly on television because I like their social media or whatever. So that's kind of my thing. In terms of monetizing it, I mean, I think I'm super lucky that I don't really have to worry about it. We're in a weird time right now where even putting my stories on Facebook or whatever is going to draw like, you know, don't read the comments, you know, it's like, yeah. I truthfully, like I kind of just wandered down this path, but like, I think the hardest thing that we face right now is like this crisis of, no matter what you do, there are going to be people who just say, I don't believe you. And that's really hard to deal with. When I started in this business, the news showed up. It was like, oh, okay, we got people here who know what they're talking about. It's Channel 12, you know, like, please come in, tell us what is going on. And about probably 2009, 2010, I started attending some events, and I'd say, well, hey, look, you know, tax rates are lower than they've ever been and blah, blah, blah. And the person looked at me in the eye and said, I don't believe you. I'm like, whew, okay. Little did I know, it's really, really going to get bad. And so that's kind of what has happened. That's the tough thing for us, is just, you know, people looking at you and saying, you have an agenda, you're controlled by this, or I don't believe you, or, you know, and absolutely legitimate criticism comes into my social media and causes me to think, hey, did I do this, you know, or did I represent this or whatever? That's great. But then you're going to run into so many people who just do not want to listen to you because of their personal philosophy or whatever. So yeah. That's the hard thing. I'm lucky I don't have to worry about the monetization aspect of it. I guess ultimately we all do, because that's how our checks come. But yeah, I haven't, I told my friends, like, if I go back into local news, like, I might just be like, you know, the next day, because like, I know I have so many friends who, what's it called? Like Share Rocket, or like some of these things that show who's the most popular tweeter right. in the market, or what story. Like, I have friends who live in fear every day. I had a friend the other day who was just like, I might have to start posting bikini pics because like my station is just breathing down my neck about upping my social media engagement. And it's just like, oh goodness, I am so happy I don't have to deal with that. But it's reality, you know, and you all are going to have to deal with that. So the quicker you learn how to be engaging and, you know, incorporate your reporting into that is pivotal, you know?
Yeah, one of the first assignments we did in this course way back at the end of May was I asked all of the participants to, if they had platforms, to standardize the branding across all platforms and to make sure that they had accounts on a Facebook page, not just a profile, but an actual page where you can get under the dashboard and see the metrics on it. And then Instagram, Twitter, Periscope, Twitch, and YouTube. all of those, and standardize the branding across all those. So all these folks set up their accounts, and I've got them too, and I've standardized my branding. But I've never done a Twitch stream.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
I've got I found the brand that works for me, and I claimed it
Yeah.
on all the platforms. And so they did a really good job of standardizing so that no matter where you go, oh yeah, that's the reporter I remember from this other platform. I can see them here.
Maybe
So,
maybe in exchange for doing this, you'll let me take the course.
Yeah.
you can teach me. I can figure out. I'm sure I can learn a few things because I'm all over the map.
One more question from me, and then I'll open it up for those guys. But if you look back now after such a storied career and success, and you look at the 20-year-old Chris Pollone, what's the one thing you wish 20-year-old Chris Pollone would have known then?
Number one, I wish I was better with money. Honest to God, like life lesson. I wish they had talked more at school. Like when we were in school, it was theoretical of you're not going to get paid anything, which is absolutely true. But when my parents moved me to Jackson, Mississippi from Boston, first of all, I found that, like, I'm sure a lot of ownership groups have really standardized their onboarding process with human resources and stuff like that. It seemed like it was a wild, wild west kind of in the 90s.
Yeah.
But like I went down and started working at WJTV, and like I'm working, and my parents are sitting at a hotel, and they're going out every day to try and find me an apartment. And finally, I had to say to my boss, "Hey, I got to get a place to live if you don't want me to live in this hotel anymore. So like I might need some time to go look at apartments." And he's like, "Oh, okay." So my parents had narrowed it down to like 3, and I picked this place. And my dad kind of said, I think if you go for the corner unit for $40 a month more, you might be happy with a little more room. Guess what? I wasn't making that much money. And so I went for that bigger apartment. And for about the span of 14 months or whatever I signed a lease for, I was like, man, I wish I had that extra $40 a month. I'm not going to lie to you. I was very lowly paid when I got to Jackson. I ran up credit card bills. I had to dig out of that. And so I would say, number one, just make sure you know what you're doing and you have a budget or you have help from your parents or whatever. Like I had reporting skills and I had, a job. I didn't have great life skills. And when you're working overnights, you're putting everything on the back burner. That was kind of like, hey, just understand. And there are people in this business who do it very well. Like I didn't get married until I was 37. And so like, I don't have children. I'm 40, about to turn 46. We don't have children yet. We don't own a house. We have a little apartment in Midtown Manhattan. I feel that a lot of people's lives get put on the back burner or put on the wayside, go by the wayside when you're in this hamster wheel. And there are certainly people who navigate it very, very well, and they move with their spouses and they have kids and whatever. But I was just like chasing this climb the markets thing. I always wanted to get back to Boston, and so like relationships and home ownership and things like that kind of were put on the back burner. And then you turn around and you go, oh man, I've been doing this for whatever and for however long, and I was working night side, so I didn't have really any social life to actually meet women that might want to marry me and things like that. So I would say like I was good at the TV and job aspect of it. I was terrible at the real life part of it. And I've been very, very fortunate, but as being the older son and my brother's 6 years behind me, my parents, I kind of basically got into college on my own. They weren't very helpful. I wish I had somebody who kind of like put an arm over my shoulder and said, hey, look, you need a budget. You need to, get rid of these credit cards. You need to find some sort of work-life balance so that you're not like on the weekends, like calling into the station and complaining about, a misspelled super, and like maybe go out and like go to church or go to a gym and meet some real human beings and kind of have a real life. So yeah. Honestly, it's not journalism related at all. It's about being a rounded person and, managing your finances, especially when you get out there and you're not making very much money to begin with.
That's great advice. That is such great advice. And that's something that, they don't teach in J school.
No,
they don't address that. and you got to go home when work is over eventually, even if you work the
Yeah.
20-hour day.
Right. Right.
Anybody on the call, any of our participants want to unmute and ask a question?
Yeah. I'm sorry for rambling so long because usually the best content is from the questions.
I would like to ask a question, please.
Sure.
Thank you so much for speaking to us today, by the way.
Sure.
But I
My
really want
pleasure.
to know about how interviewing people in the Olympics worked and how exactly did you score that gig? Because I think that's super cool.
Is this, did you look at my LinkedIn?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. Olympic channel. Okay. So one of the freelance gigs that I fell into was field producing for the Olympic channel. I've never been to the Olympics, which is a regret of mine. There were 3 events I want to do still in my career: political convention, inauguration, and the Olympics. But one of the freelance photographers that I work with very often in New York City that News Channel hires all the time is this guy who does extensive stuff for the Olympic channel and does go to the Olympics. And so there was one day where he lost a field producer for a shoot, and he put the Olympics channel in contact with me. And so I've been doing freelance gigs. I've only done a handful of things for them. But whenever something Olympic related happens in New York City, they usually call me. So Merrill Davis and Charlie White came to open the Rockefeller Center ice skating rink whenever they put that in, September or whatever it is. And I went and did that. About a year ago, they had the ski team awards in New York City, Lindsey Vonn and all the members, Shaun White. So I went and field produced that. But I haven't been to the Olympics, but just a contact. My photographer put me in touch with the Olympic channel, which is actually based in Madrid. I had no idea they're based in Spain. And so they hire me from time to time on a freelance basis to produce. But yeah, in terms of going to the Olympics, I would love to go.
Yeah, that was, by the way, that was Sarah Gray Barr, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill student. And when you unmute and ask your question, just give us your name and your school.
Yeah. And I want to say, Gene, one thing I want to say is I did notice that I got some Instagram and LinkedIn follows. Like, good for you. I'm not saying you have to do it, but like the one thing that drives me crazy is like I will speak to student groups or whatever, and like nobody will stick around to ask a question, or I'll say, hey, I would be glad to critique a tape, put you in contact if there's someplace you might, need to know somebody or whatever. And then I never hear from them. And like, that's so anathema to me. Like when I was in school, now granted, I'm sure everybody hated me, but I was the one who went and lined up to go talk to Bob Costas or go talk to, whatever after the event. And so like for the people who like did look and whatever, and I'm sure Gene told you to, do your homework, good for you. I'm not saying you have to follow me. We don't ever have to interact again. But like, if you have questions or if you, want to tape critique or whatever, like, please take advantage of the people in the career who can help you get to where you want to go. Not reaching out is insane if you want help.
That's great advice. And just a program note, which the interns know about, but I'll share with you. This is the same Zoom channel that we used to bring in our remote weather with for our noon broadcast, and they usually leave us alone until 45. But if we get cut off, it's not me hanging up on you. Okay.
That's hilarious. Okay.
Who else would like to ask a question?
I'll try to be more brief.
I have a quick question. My name is Mallory Harris. I am from Columbus State University, but I live in Athens where everything is still pretty shut down.
Sure.
So while you're working from home, how have you been? Do you have any tips for maybe networking from home or generating stories when you're, in person's not available?
Yeah, great question. I don't think any of us know. It's one of those days where you're like, I'm going to do better today, and then you don't. I would just say that that's tough. I guess I would utilize more online resources at that point. I think many people, and you guys may be great at this. I could be totally. This might just be old guy going, nobody knows how to use this. Like, no, we all do. Early on when Twitter first came out, I didn't even want to join. Like our digital director Kristen at WVTM signed me up, and I'm like, I don't want to be on this. Now I can't, stop using it. Like, there are so many powerful search tools on most social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook that you can really drill down to neighborhoods and kind of follow threads about what people are, or if you hear that something has happened, you can really start to search and see if things are really going on. So it's not great it's not great advice, but I would say like kind of like old school beat calls. When I was first in the business, you know, the first person in the newsroom had to call all the police departments to find out what was going on. You know, you're going to have to do it by phone or by Zoom or, you know, search social media to kind of perk up the, you know, these Facebook groups and Nextdoor and stuff like that. Like, start to find the little seeds that might be stories, and then just use the phone or email to kind of start reaching out. You know, Google is a great tool. That's the other thing too, is people don't realize, you know, you hear about something going on, you know, click on the neighborhood, do a street view, see if you can identify a house number, or like a gas station nearby or whatever. Like I'm a big proponent of doing as much as you can online before you even leave the building. So if you can't leave the building, I guess you have to do it all online. But it's, you know, it's a great question. But if you're stuck at home and you want to, you know, you want to make some contacts, you know, call some offices in a beat that you're interested in covering, you know, if it's, you know, women's issues or crime or courts or whatever. Just, you know, kind of like, hey, what's things like going in the courts now? You guys back in session? Call them, you know. I wish I had better advice, but it's so hard. Everybody's just sitting at home, and I don't know. We're just going to have to get out of this.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Valerie.
Sure. I wish I had a better answer.
Anyone else?
Yes, I have a question.
Okay, go ahead, guys. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yes, I would like to ask a question. Thank you so much for
Sure.
taking time out of your day to be with us. So I have a question. What if a story subject is unable to be interviewed? Like if you have been trying to interview someone, but then you can't because of certain policies or they got to go through certain processes and you're not able to talk to them. So how would you make plans or have backup story ideas?
Yeah. The first thing I do is I meet with my managers, because if it's a story worth doing, there may be another way to do it. Like, they may be able to point you in a direction of somebody who could do it. And if not, then you can have the conversation with your news director or your general manager both about, you know, possibly granting anonymity of some sort. You know, sometimes we do interviews in shadow, or, you know, shoot their hands, disguise their voice. It depends on the type of story. If the story just falls through and it's not going to go, I mean, you just got to go to your backup list of stuff that you potentially can do. But I would encourage you, if it is a story worth doing and you're getting a lot of, I can't talk about that, they often can help you find somebody who can talk about it. Or, like I said, you have the conversation about, if they're compelling enough and they can prove what they're saying and you can verify it through other means, you might have to have that anonymity conversation. You know, obviously a lot of people think that a lot of major newspapers and stuff grant anonymity too easily today, and that may be true. So you really have to be judicious about it, but there is a time and a place for it. And if the story is important enough, and you really have been banging your head to try and get somebody on the record, then you might have to go down that route. But that's what managers are for, because they're paid to make the tough calls and they can guide you in that instance.
I believe that was Lainey Mayfield from Auburn University, right, Lainey?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Thanks for the question. And I believe we had one other question.
Yes, I did. Thank you so much for answering that one. But also, what were your strengths and weaknesses as a young journalist?
I think that, well, I've already talked about not knowing how to spend or make money. But, you know, my weaknesses were, I drove into work nervous every day, especially when I started reporting, because I was so afraid that I would miss something or forget to ask something in an interview. And so, like, early on in my career, I mean, I'm stealing this from Bob Costas and many others who came before me and spoke to me, and my own mentor, but I will tell you this. If you are the most prepared person in the room, you will never do a bad job. And so I know it's tough with a lot of different shows and platforms that you have to publish through, that the reporting kind of gets lost sometimes. But like, so when I was so nervous to go into work every day and think, because I would torture myself. I would record the other stations, and after the show, I would go watch and see if I did the best job or if they did the best job. And so I never wanted to be the one like, oh, I didn't know that, or I didn't report that, or okay. So before I went in, or before I did my story, I just sat down and I wrote down every question I could ever think of. Now, they might not get asked, but in my mind, when I went into the interview, I knew what I needed to find out. And so I think my biggest thing was, I was slow. I probably asked 2 billion questions on tape, which is a no-no. Like now, when I go to a story, I'm kind of running through that in my head. People say, hey, can I see your questions? Which, no, you can't. But I don't even have them written down to show you anymore, because I kind of have gotten to a place where I know, all right, this needs to be asked off camera. We can do this before we even do the interview, before I even show up. And then there are certain things I'm going to get you on tape, but I don't want to shoot 4 hours worth of tape, because we're going to have to go through it. So I would say that I was certainly weak at knowing what to ask. And so I improved myself, and I was slow. And so I improved myself by just being super prepared before I went out the door, research to know every aspect of a story. And so then when I went to go shoot it and write it and edit it, it was the most complete and well done story I can do. I find that, especially now where you carry around all the world's knowledge in your pocket, I used to carry file folders of old stories. Like we had Eric Robert Rudolph, the Centennial Park bomber, running around the wild, and one day he might be captured. I had printouts of stories in a file folder that I carried with me every day. So if they said, Eric Robert Rudolph's down in Tarrant, I could start reading as we're driving to figure out what he did and why he was important. Now you have that right here. So use it before you go to the story, so you know what they're going to say to you, how you can tell. Like if I interview the president, I know what he's going to say. He says it every day. I need to know the arguments against it to get that. It's the same with the mayor. It's the same with, anybody you deal with.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Did we have one more question before we sign off?
I did. My question is, and I guess it was kind of touched on with the policies and stuff, because I'm doing an article that is about an institution. Have you found it easier to kind of get some information from administrators, or get your hands on official school communication? Or has that been a challenge?
Yeah, it's always a challenge. I mean, especially you deal with hospitals, you deal with universities. For some reason, it seems like their default mode is not to tell you what you need to know. All right, so one skill I wish, another thing early on, the money and the budget, but the other thing is try to take some investigative courses, either through IRE or Pointer, before, even if you don't want to investigate. I'm kind of a daily turn type of guy. I hate long projects because I don't have that type of my mind doesn't work that way of working on something for multiple days. But I wish I was better at FOIA, Freedom of Information Act requests. I have a woman that I mentor. She used to do is work on a news desk in a major market and submit FOIAs. Well, she just got her first on-air job in Iowa, and on the first day, she filed 200 Freedom of Information Act requests for all different types of facts and data to try and see if she could generate story ideas from that. That's brilliant. I'm not great at filing FOIA. So I would say you guys are going to be more data-driven and more document-driven, because more and more entities are learning from the White House on down, I don't have to answer you. You can ask all day long. We have all these sunshine laws, but we aren't going to follow them. We don't even follow subpoenas, so, or depositions. So I would say that the better you get at going around the PR person or the administrator and getting them to hand you over, especially if they're a government entity, emails, documents, or whatever, the better off you're going to be in your career. And then you can go to them and say, well, I know this and I know that. You need to respond. And so, you're going to deal with officials your whole career, and some of them are great, and some of them will tell you everything you need to know. Some of them will be anonymous. I had a police official in Jackson, Mississippi, who told me everything, and he would tell me what the other stations do, because I was so far ahead of them on their reporting. He'd be like, look, they're not even in the ballpark with you. This is what you got. I mean, it was great, but not everybody's like that, and they're going to try and shut you down. And so, the better you are at getting it from rank and file, first of all, those secretaries and whatever, to tell you, so you can go to them and say, well, no, I know this is true. and documents and data, the better off you're going to be.
Thank you. And thank you for
Sure.
speaking with us today.
My pleasure, always.
Jada Carswell, University of West Georgia. Thanks for the question. Chris, we're up at 1:15.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're going to steal the Zoom meeting for us soon. So to the interns
weather.
here, I would say take Chris up on his offer.
Sure.
He has told you that if you need to have him as a connection to review some of your work or to ask him questions, that he's willing to do that. You know, I can tell you there are tons of people in this industry that when they see young, eager, hardworking journalists to be, they are eager and willing to help them, that we need people like you in our industry. Take Chris up on his offer and maintain this communication with him. And to you, Chris, friend, it's so nice to see you, and I'm glad
thank you for having
and
me.
your wife are doing well, and I appreciate you sharing your experiences and your knowledge with the people in the class, and let's you and me continue to converse, and anything you need from me, please let me know. Okay.
Same here. Glad to see you. Reach out to me anytime. I can't give back money, but I can always mentor people. I love to do it. It's more important than ever right now to have robust journalism, especially local journalism, which is really hurting right now. And please share my email address or my social media. Anybody reach out. It may take me a little while. If I don't answer you in a couple of weeks or whatever, write back. Just remind me. You know, we all get busy, but just let me know that you were in this internship class or whatever, and I'll help you out any way I can.
That's great. Be blessed, Chris. You guys have a wonderful week and a wonderful weekend.
Be good,
We'll see you
everyone.
next week.
Thank you
so much. Have a
now.
wonderful day.
Thank you.